Welcome back, everyone. Ready for another deep dives? Today, we're going deep into the world of shadow integration.
Ooh, shadow work. Always a fascinating topic.
It is, and a bit mysterious, right? Like, what is this shadow everyone's always talking about?
Right, it can sound kind of intimidating.
We're going to break it down, though, using this excerpt we've got. It's actually from a longer text all about, well, self-awareness and personal growth and all that good stuff.
Sounds like it's right up our alley.
It totally is. And I think it's something so many of us can relate to. Like, have you ever just had this really strong reaction to
Okay,
someone?
yeah, right.
And you're like, whoa, where did that come from? It feels kind of out of proportion to the situation.
Like way more intense than it needs to be.
Exactly. Well, that might be your shadow talking.
Interesting. Okay, so the shadow, how does this excerpt define it?
It basically says it's like this unconscious part of ourselves
Unconscious.
where we kind of bury all the stuff we don't want to deal with. You know, those thoughts, feelings, impulses, the stuff we deem undesirable.
Undesirable. So, what kind of things are we talking about here? Give me some examples.
I'm curious about that too. What gets shoved into this shadow realm?
Well, it can be a lot of things. It's like, think back to when you were growing up. Were there any traits or qualities you were told were like bad or wrong?
Interesting. Yeah.
Like maybe you were always told not to get angry?
Oh, yeah. Or to be more ladylike, like that kind of thing.
Exactly. Or maybe like your creativity wasn't really encouraged or celebrated.
So basically, those things we were kind of shamed for or told to suppress.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Those are the kinds of things that can end up in the shadow.
Ah, that makes sense. So it's not necessarily that these traits are inherently bad. It's just that they were labeled as such by, our families, our culture, whatever.
Precisely. And it's even more interesting. The shadow's not all negative. It's not like some dark, evil monster lurking within.
Oh, really? Tell me more about that.
Well, it can actually hold positive qualities too, like strengths and talents that we've suppressed. Maybe because they didn't fit the image we had of ourselves or what others expected of us.
Oh, wow. So, like, what kind of positive stuff could be hiding in there?
For example, maybe you had this natural leadership ability, but it got kind of stifled because you were always expected to follow the rules, not rock the boat.
That makes sense.
Or maybe you're super creative deep down, but you were told to focus on more practical things.
So, there's like potential gold hidden in our shadows. That's a cool way to think about it.
It is. It makes you wonder what we're all capable of if we could just tap into those hidden parts of ourselves.
It totally does. This is making me think about all those times I've been like super envious of someone, like really judgmental. What if those reactions are actually reflecting something back at me? Something I haven't fully acknowledged or accepted within myself.
Whoa, that is insightful. That's getting to the core of why this shadow work is so important. It's not about beating ourselves up for these reactions, but rather using them as clues to see what's going on beneath the surface.
Okay, I'm with you. So, if we're going to start exploring the shadow, how does it actually show up in everyday life? What should we be looking for?
I'm glad you asked. Our source material has some great examples of this. Like think about your triggers, those situations or people that just set off intense emotional responses in you.
Oh, I have plenty of those.
Right, we all do. But those triggers, they can be like little red flags pointing to shadow material.
So it's not just that the other person is being annoying, it's like something deeper is going on.
Exactly. It's like our shadow's getting activated, and that's why we're reacting so strongly.
Fascinating.
And another way it shows up is through projections.
Oh, projections. Tell me more about that.
That's when we see our own unwanted qualities in other people.
Yep.
It's like when you get super annoyed by someone's flakiness. But deep down, you struggle with time management too.
Ooh, that is so true. It's like looking in a mirror, but you don't like what you see, so you blame the mirror.
Exactly. And it doesn't stop there. The shadow can sneak out in dreams too.
Dreams, okay, yeah.
Slips of the tongue, self-sabotaging behaviors, all sorts of ways.
So it's like this hidden part of us is constantly trying to get our attention.
It is.
Sending us messages through these everyday experiences. But what happens if we just ignore those messages? Pretend the shadow isn't there.
Well, that can be a problem.
What's the cost of keeping it hidden?
Ignoring your shadow is like trying to hold a beach ball underwater. It takes a lot of energy, and eventually it's going to pop up somewhere else, often in ways we don't expect or enjoy.
Oh, so not good.
Right, not good. The source material even says this can lead to all sorts of issues. Psychological distress, self-sabotage, problems in relationships.
Yikes. Okay, so pretending it's not there isn't an option. So what can we do about it?
That's where shadow integration comes in.
Okay.
It's not about getting rid of the shadow. That's
Mm.
impossible. We all have one.
Right.
But it's about shining a light on it, understanding it, and ultimately incorporating it into our sense of self.
So we're not trying to banish it, we're trying to befriend it.
Exactly. It's more like, hey, shadow, let's talk.
Okay, I'm ready to eliminate my shadow. Let's get into the how-to. What's the first step?
Well, it all starts with self-reflection and mindfulness, like really paying attention to our thoughts, emotions, and behaviors.
So becoming more aware of what's going on inside.
Exactly. But not in a judgmental way. Like you don't want to beat yourself up for having these shadow elements.
Right, that makes sense. So it's more about just observing, like a scientist.
Yeah, exactly.
Mhm.
Think of yourself as a detective, just noticing those recurring patterns, like what triggers you, what makes you feel, intensely envious or critical. These are all clues to your shadow.
Okay, that makes sense. So let's say I notice that I consistently feel inferior in certain situations. What could that be telling me about my shadow?
That's a great question. Feeling inferior, it might point to some deep-seated beliefs about yourself,
Hmm.
maybe stemming from experiences where your confidence got chipped away.
Ah, so like from childhood or something.
Yeah, could be. Maybe you were told you weren't good enough or smart enough.
Wow, that's like a lot of people, I bet.
It is. But the good news is, once you start to see these patterns, you can start to work with them.
Okay, so once we start to see these patterns, what do we do?
Well, our source has a suggestion. They're big fans of journaling.
Journaling.
Yeah, just like writing down your thoughts and feelings about these things, it can help you make connections and see things more clearly.
Journaling, yeah, I can see that. It's like having a direct line to your inner world, right?
Exactly. And you can ask yourself specific questions in your journal to really dig deeper.
Okay, like what kind of questions should we be asking?
Here's one from the source. What qualities do I strongly dislike in others?
That's a good one. What does that tell us about our shadow?
Well, often those qualities we find most irritating in others are reflections of the parts of ourselves we've disowned.
Oh,
So like if you get super annoyed by someone who's always bragging, maybe it's because you have a part of you that craves recognition too,
mm.
but you're afraid to show it or own it.
Wow. Yeah, that's powerful. It's like instead of judging that person, I can use it as an opportunity to reflect on myself.
Exactly. It's not about blaming yourself, but using those judgments as a starting point for self-exploration.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, what about those shadow aspects that we're even afraid to admit to ourselves? The stuff we've buried so deep we don't even want to look at it.
That's where things can get really intense, but also really liberating. Facing those hidden truths can be a huge step towards healing and integration.
All right, I'm feeling brave. Let's talk about working with those projections directly. How can we use those to understand our shadow better?
So imagine you're judging someone for being like insecure and constantly seeking validation.
Okay, yeah.
Instead of criticizing them, try asking yourself, where do I feel insecure? Do I also crave that validation, even if I don't show it outwardly?
Wow, turning that judgment inward, that's a game changer. It's like using those external annoyances as a mirror to reflect on our own inner world.
Precisely.
Hmm.
And the source material also talks about embracing triggers as opportunities for growth.
Wait, triggers as opportunities. That sounds a little counterintuitive. Aren't triggers usually negative?
Yeah, they can feel that way. But instead of fearing or avoiding them, we can see them as valuable signals, pointing to our shadow.
Okay.
So let's say public speaking is a trigger for you. You get super anxious, your heart races, palms are sweaty.
Oh, I know that feeling.
Right. But instead of letting that anxiety take over, you can explore it. Ask yourself, like, what's at the root of this fear? Is it a past experience? A limiting belief about myself?
So it's like reframing the trigger as a chance to learn something about myself rather than something to just avoid.
Exactly.
Okay, I like that. So we've got self-reflection, journaling, working with projections, embracing triggers. What else?
Well, this is where things get a little more interesting. The source material also talks about dream work.
Dream work.
Yeah, like paying attention to our dreams.
Oh, interesting.
They offer a direct line to our unconscious, including our shadow.
Okay, so those weird dreams aren't just random nonsense. They actually mean something.
Absolutely. Our source suggests starting a dream journal, keeping a notebook by your bed and writing down your dreams as soon as you wake up, even if they're just fragments.
I've tried that before, but I always forget my dreams.
That's normal. The key is just consistency. The more you do it, the better you'll get at remembering.
Makes sense.
And what about visualization? Have you ever tried that?
Visualization, I haven't really. What's that about?
Well, it's a powerful way to tap into your unconscious. Like, imagine encountering a figure that represents your shadow. What would it look like? What would it say to you?
Whoa. Okay, that sounds kind of intense.
It can be,
Yeah.
but it can also be really revealing. Think of it as a safe way to explore those shadow elements.
Okay, so we've got self-reflection, journaling, working with projections, embracing triggers, exploring dreams, and visualization. Is there anything else we can do to tackle this shadow work?
This is all good stuff, but shadow work can be tough.
Yeah, it sounds like it.
And sometimes it's helpful to have some extra support. That's where therapy can be incredibly valuable.
Ah, yeah, that makes sense. Having a trained professional to kind of guide you through this process can make a huge difference, especially if you're dealing with some deep-seated stuff.
Exactly. A therapist can offer insights, tools, and a safe space to explore your shadow and integrate its wisdom into your life.
So it's not a weakness to ask for help with this. It's actually a sign of strength and self-awareness.
Absolutely. Now, you might be wondering, what's the point of all this? Like, what are the benefits of doing all this shadow work?
I was just thinking that. What's in it for me? If I go through all this digging and exploring, what's the payoff?
Well, the benefits actually go way beyond just understanding your shadow. Like, our source material says it can lead to increased self-awareness and authenticity,
Okay, that sounds good.
greater emotional resilience, improved relationships. Like, the list goes on and on.
Okay, I'm all ears. Tell me more about those benefits.
Well, let's start with self-awareness and authenticity. Shadow work allows you to see yourself more fully, like both the light and the dark. It's not about becoming perfect, getting rid of your flaws. It's about accepting yourself as you are, warts and all.
That's so refreshing. It's like giving yourself permission to be human, with
Right.
all the complexities that come with it.
Exactly. And that acceptance is incredibly empowering. You can show up in the world more genuinely without hiding behind masks.
That sounds liberating. Now, what about emotional resilience? How does shadow work help with those inevitable ups and downs of life?
Think of it this way. When you become aware of and integrate your shadow, you're less likely to be, hijacked by your emotions.
Oh, interesting.
Like, imagine you're facing a work deadline, right?
Yeah.
But you're doing it with this shadow-integrated mindset.
Mm.
Instead of panicking and getting overwhelmed, you acknowledge those feelings of stress and fear. You tap into your inner resources and come up with a plan.
So instead of reacting impulsively, we can pause, reflect, and choose a more skillful response.
Exactly. You develop greater self-regulation,
Mhm.
which helps you navigate those tough situations with more grace.
Okay, this is so practical. It's not just about some abstract psychological concept. It's about equipping ourselves to actually live better lives.
It totally is. And this emotional resilience spills over into all areas of life, relationships, career, even just dealing with everyday stress.
I can see that. What about relationships? Does shadow work impact those as well?
Oh, absolutely. When you've done your own shadow work, you're less likely to project your own, unresolved issues onto others.
Oh, so instead of blaming my partner for being too critical, I might realize that I'm actually the one being overly critical, but I've been projecting that onto them.
That's a great example. Shadow work allows you to see those patterns more clearly, take responsibility for your own stuff. And that shift leads to less judgment, more empathy, deeper connections.
This is powerful stuff. But what about that untapped potential we talked about earlier? All those positive qualities hiding in the shadow. How does shadow integration help us access those?
Ah, yes. Remember, the shadow isn't all bad. It's like a treasure chest
Ooh, a treasure chest. I like that.
filled with hidden gems. Creativity, leadership, assertiveness, intuition, all waiting to be discovered.
So as we integrate our shadow, we're not just getting rid of the bad stuff, we're adding all these new strengths and abilities to our repertoire.
Precisely. It's like unlocking a superpower.
I love that image. It's like we're piecing together a more complete and authentic version of ourselves.
Yes. And that brings us to the ultimate benefit of shadow integration,
Okay, what's that?
personal empowerment and freedom.
Okay, I'm hooked. Tell me more about that freedom.
So imagine you've done the work. You understand and integrate your shadow. You face those limiting beliefs, those fears and insecurities that were holding you back. Now you can make choices from a place of true alignment
Alignment with what?
with your values and desires.
Mm.
You can pursue your goals with confidence. Live a life that feels truly authentic and meaningful.
Wow, it's like breaking free from all those chains of self-doubt and stepping into your full potential.
Exactly. You're no longer at the mercy of your shadow. You're in the driver's seat.
This has been such an eye-opening conversation. I'm starting to see how shadow work can be this lifelong journey.
It is.
But I gotta be honest, the idea of facing those hidden parts of myself, it can feel a bit daunting.
Oh, totally understandable. It can be challenging, but it's also incredibly rewarding. Remember, you don't have to do it all at once. Take it one step at a time. Be gentle with yourself. Celebrate your progress.
That's such a great reminder. We're all works in progress. The shadow is just a part of the journey.
Exactly. And remember, there's support available if you need it. Don't be afraid to reach out to a therapist or a trusted friend.
This deep dive has been truly insightful. I feel like I have a whole new perspective. But before we wrap up, I want to leave our listeners with a thought-provoking question to ponder.
I love it. What is it?
If you could have an honest conversation with your shadow self, what do you think it would say?
Ooh, that's a deep one. It really makes you think, doesn't it?
It does. It's like giving a voice to that often ignored part of ourselves, right?
Totally. And you know what else struck me about this excerpt?
What's that?
It acknowledges that this shadow integration stuff, it's not always easy.
Yeah, I was just thinking about that. It would be kind of naive to think we could just magically erase our shadow.
Right. Facing those parts of ourselves we've judged or denied, it can bring up some uncomfortable stuff.
No doubt about it. It's like opening a door you've kept locked for years.
I love that analogy.
Yeah,
Because you really don't know what you're going to find on the other side.
exactly. So what are some of those challenges people might face as they start exploring their shadow?
Well, one thing is that it can be emotionally unsettling to confront those aspects of ourselves that don't fit our ideal self-image, you know?
We all have this idea of who we are.
Right. And it can be jarring to realize there are parts of us that don't quite match that picture.
Yeah, like realizing the carefully curated image we present to the world might not be the whole story.
Exactly. And that can lead to feelings of shame, guilt, even self-loathing.
Whoa, heavy stuff?
It is. But it's important to remember those are natural reactions. It doesn't mean you're a bad person.
Right. It just means you're human.
Exactly.
Good.
Human and perfectly imperfect. So how do we navigate those tough emotions with self-compassion?
Yeah. Any tips for those moments when we're feeling overwhelmed or discouraged?
The key is to treat yourself with kindness. You know, like you would a close friend who's struggling. Instead of beating yourself up for having these shadow aspects, acknowledge them with gentleness and curiosity.
So like instead of saying, ugh, I can't believe I did that, I'm such a terrible person, I could say, okay, that was a tough moment. I'm feeling a lot of shame right now, but I know I'm not defined by this one action.
Exactly. That's a
Yeah.
perfect example.
Right.
And don't forget, you don't have to go through this alone.
Right. Community and connection can be so powerful.
Absolutely. Talking to a therapist or a supportive friend can make a huge difference.
Okay, so we've talked about the challenges, but this excerpt also emphasizes that shadow integration is not a one-time fix. It's an ongoing process.
It is. There's no magic pill that'll instantly erase your shadow. It's a
Yeah.
journey.
So there's no finish line where I've suddenly conquered my shadow and achieved perfect self-awareness.
Nope, not going to happen. But that's okay. You know why?
Why?
Because new layers of the shadow can emerge throughout our lives,
Interesting.
triggered by new experiences, relationships, life changes. You name it.
So it really is a lifelong process of growth and evolution.
It is. And the beauty is that as we become more practiced at recognizing and integrating those shadow parts, we become more resilient, more self-aware.
More authentically ourselves.
Exactly.
This conversation has been amazing. I feel like we've just scratched the surface of shadow work.
We have. But hopefully we've given our listeners a good starting point.
I think so. And one last thought that really resonated with me from this excerpt is this. Embracing our shadow isn't about becoming perfect. It's about becoming whole.
Yes. It's like a powerful statement. That's what it's all about.
It's about accepting and integrating all parts of who we are. The light and the dark, the messy and the magnificent.
Beautifully said.
Yeah.
It's about recognizing that our imperfections, our so-called flaws, they're not something to be ashamed of.
They're part of what makes us unique.
Right. Complex and beautifully human.
This has been such a thought-provoking deep dive. Thank you so much for joining me.
It's been my pleasure. Always love a good shadow exploration.
To all our listeners out there, thank you for tuning in. Keep exploring those hidden depths. And remember, be kind to yourself along the way.